hosted by Vinnova, Sweden's innovation agency, through Nordic Innovation's Task Force for Diversity. Moderating this event today is me, Annie Limmark, and my colleague Moa Persdotter from Vinnova. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please turn off your microphones during the presentations. Feel free to have the camera on if you want to. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat. We will try to continuously, or at the end of the presentation, pick them up. Also for your information, this webinar is being recorded. So the agenda for this webinar is that we have 1 hour filled with interesting presentations and views, and our hope is that you will leave this webinar with some new perspectives and ideas. And we will begin by briefly introduce Vinnova and Nordic Innovation Task Force for Diversity. We will then get to listen to some key findings from the report, Female Entrepreneurs in the Nordics 2020. And after that, we have three fantastic guests who will present their view on today's topic and what they are doing around the way forward in this question. Finally, we will have some short questions, but feel free, as I said, to write questions in the chat continuously. And if we do not have time to answer them in the end of the webinar, we will try to pick them up afterwards, and we will also email you all participants in this meeting so you have the chances to get. But let's kick off to say something short about today's hosts. So Vinnova, we are Sweden's innovation agency. We help to build Sweden's innovation capacity and contributing to sustainable growth. Our vision is that Sweden should be an innovative force in a sustainable world. You can say shortly that we have three roles. We work to identify, mobilize, and finance. Where identifying is about identifying areas where our effort can make a difference. Mobilizing is about how we can create opportunities and incentives for organizations to work together to meet important social challenges. And financing is about giving out grants to innovation and research projects often in early stages where it's high risk. Here, Vinnova invests approximately 3 billion Swedish kronor into research and innovation in Sweden. And we base all of our work around the Global Sustainable Development Goals of the Agenda 2030. And we also work to ensure that the knowledge and the needs of the entire population are utilized and considered, and that initiatives supported by us will benefit all. So in our instructions from the government, it also says into the gender equality in the distribution of funds for research and innovation. And we also have a dedicated core team here at Vinnova working with these questions and topics. One initiative that we are part of is the Nordic Task Force for Diversity. And that leads me into the second host of today, Nordic Innovation, an organization that aims to make the Nordic a pioneering region of sustainable growth and work to promote entrepreneurship and innovation in the Nordic business. The Nordic Task Force for Diversity consists of members with roles like Vinnova from all the Nordic countries, together with Nordic Innovation. And the objective of the task force is to identify obstacles, learn from each other, and identify possible measures to initiate on a Nordic level. And the aim of the task force is to make the Nordic innovation ecosystem more gender equal. And earlier this year, the task force wanted to understand the current state of the female entrepreneurship in the Nordics, and that resulted in this report that we see here. And now our focus lies on creating discussions and also putting together relevant actions on a Nordic level around the different key findings of the reports. And today we are highlighting one of the key findings of the report, which is the one about access to capital. In the report, it says that female entrepreneurs have less access to external funding than male entrepreneurs in the Nordics, and that several studies point to female entrepreneurs not being able to raise as much capital as their male counterparts. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Moa, who will present today's speakers, who will touch upon this subject.
That introduction. The time has come to introduce you to our speakers. With us today, we have Sigrid from the consultancy firm Menon Economics, who has written the report about the current status of female entrepreneurs within the Nordic Innovation System. And today we'll hear about the key findings from the report. What we already know is that the numbers is non-equal and non-inclusive. An actor having tested and proven tools to changes is the Yes Way, a program for innovation actors such as incubators that want to take real action on the problems, presented here today for us by Melina and Sara. But all entrepreneurs need coaching, network, and community when raising funding. And that is what the startup house Mink in Malmö offers. To tell us more about this, we have Ida with us today. And we cannot talk about changing the inequality within the financing or funding system without talking to VCs. Last but not least, we have the angel investor Hampus from his latest project, the recently founded VC firm Pale Blue Dot today. So that was a quick presentation of today's speakers. So let's kick off with Menon and Sigrid telling us about the key findings from the report. So the screen is yours, Sigrid.
Thank you very much. So I'm Sigrid and I'm an analyst at Menon Economics, which is a consultancy. It's a research-based consultancy firm located in Oslo. So this spring, we wrote a report for Nordic Innovation, female entrepreneurship in the Nordics. Yes, you can put the next slide. So when we started looking into this matter, we early on detected two aspects of interest. The first is that even though the Nordic countries are viewed as forerunners on gender equality and women's labor force participation, we find that far fewer women than men are starting businesses in the Nordic countries. And this is confirmed by other studies as well. Secondly, even though the Nordic countries are often considered to be culturally similar, they have similar social system, economic structures, labor markets, models of the welfare state, there are clear differences in the share of female entrepreneurs across the Nordic countries. And why is this? That is what we have tried to investigate in our study. Next. So our study is based on new data from the statistical agencies in the Nordics and Byråfondverk. And that enables us to compare entrepreneurship across the Nordic countries. Another important source of information has been to review relevant literature, and a large part of that has been based on the Nordic countries, or literature from the Nordic countries. But we have also broadened the horizon by assessing international literature where relevant. So our goal with this report is to shed light on some aspects that affect female entrepreneurship, and thus enable policymakers and governments to use more precise measures to target female entrepreneurship. Next. So our findings. Well, we have already illustrated that there's a lower share of female entrepreneurs than male entrepreneurs across all Nordic countries. In addition, we find that if you look at business performance, so we've cohort of companies during 5 years, and we saw that the companies founded by men have a higher average and median turnover than those companies founded by women. And this is true for all Nordic countries. Next. And if you also look at the top 10% performing companies of men and women, we find that those founded by men have a higher growth than those founded by women. So why is this? Next. So in the report, we have looked at several aspects that might help explain the low share of female entrepreneurs, and then especially the low share of female entrepreneurs among high growth companies, because it's really those you want to target. So the factors that we investigated can be split into two groups. So you have on one side the personal characteristics and preferences, that's such as age, education, industry, preference for risk. And then you have structural factors that are outside the control of the individual entrepreneur. These are funding institutions, startup environments, and so on. So I'm only going to comment on a few of the personal characteristics of entrepreneurs in today, but the report covers several others. So I would encourage you to read about them in our report if you're interested. But what is especially relevant for today's topic is that Female entrepreneurs, they tend to start up companies in industries such as personal services, childcare, health and social work, food and accommodation. Whereas if we look at the high growth establishment, there we find that men more than women tend to start up to establish businesses, and these are industries such as ICT and technology. In addition, studies suggest that women have a lower preference for risk, and this might also explain why women are underrepresented among high growth companies, because as expanding your business usually requires the entrepreneur to take on more risk. We've also looked at factors that are not driven by the characteristics of the female entrepreneurs themselves, and whether these factors make it more difficult for women to succeed. So the first is related to role models and networks, because many studies confirm the importance of role models for entrepreneurship. A role model will encourage and aid an entrepreneur both before and during starting up a business. Our study reveals that women have less access to role models and smaller networks, which makes them less likely to innovate. And smaller networks may even impact female entrepreneurs' access to capital. Next. So there's much evidence pointing towards that the entrepreneurial culture is being male dominated. And this will make it difficult for women to succeed if it discourages them from participating in startup environments, which in turn will give them less access to capital and growth. And the last, next, perfect. So this is really relevant for today, access to external funding. So what we find is that female entrepreneurs have less access to external funding than male entrepreneurs. And this makes it difficult for them to expand. And there are several explanations for why women have less access to capital. For instance, it may be caused by a lower preference for risk and a higher fear of failure among women, but it can also be due to gender biases among financial institutions, to mention a few. Next. So, as mentioned, the goal with our report was to shed light on some aspects that affect female entrepreneurship and thus enable policymakers and governments to use more precise measures that can target female entrepreneurship. So we proposed measures in our report within 4 areas where we believe can be relevant and effective in increasing the number of female entrepreneurs with a significant growth potential. And the last part there is important. So the first one is to establish more comprehensive female Nordic mentoring schemes and our networks. And looking at this in a Nordic level, sorry, I meant Nordic, not Norwegian. So looking at this in the Nordic level also expands the pool of available and relevant role models, but also related to networks. Next. So the second area where we propose measures is very relevant for today, and it's about increasing female entrepreneurs' access to capital. And this is really a challenging field. In the report, we have outlined some possible suggestions. So one possible measure is to investigate whether the promotion of investment funds and venture capital is directed predominantly towards a male audience. That might be through the language, illustrations that are, for instance, used on their web pages. Another possible measure is to review the investment guidelines of governmental investment companies. A third measure, we have several ones also in the report, will require much more effort to execute, but will most definitely increase access to capital, and that is to establish a government-supported women investment fund in the Nordics. We have also suggested areas, as you can see here, number 3 and 4, related to the competitive disadvantages in industries where women operate, and a scheme for commercialization leave. So this report provides you with a status quo on female entrepreneurship in the Nordics, and we hope that the material provided, both the statistics but also the proposed measures, will spark a common Nordic discussion on the opportunities and how to detect them and encourage female high-growth entrepreneurs. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sigrid, for a really interesting presentation. We will send a link to the report in the chat. Now, when we heard about the numbers, it's time to hear some thoughts about how we can change them. And to present this, we have Melina and Sara from the Yes Way.
Hey guys,
Yes.
hey everybody.
Hi. Hi. Yes, we are the Yes Way. We're an initiative that works for equality and inclusion within innovation, entrepreneurship, and funding. The Yes Way was initiated in 2018 by the Swedish incubator Ideon Innovation and was financed by Vinnova as a development project. Since then, we have developed tools and work methods to better attract and support the entrepreneurs that the innovation support system has difficulties in reaching. Our focus has mainly been on women and non-binary people, but we also take a broader approach when working with equality and inclusion. We offer support to organizations, and currently we are running a national development program with 6 organizations in the innovation support system. These organizations, they want to contribute to change and think in new ways and broaden their perspectives. Our work shows that for the innovation support system and funding climate to be more inclusive, the current focus on economic and fast growth and technological innovations needs to broaden, and there needs to be a change in attitudes. I is going to present 11 action points. So next.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, hey, my name is Melina and I work with Sarah. I'm in Malmö and Sarah, you're in Stockholm. We were supposed to sit together today. But yes, as our work with the Yes Way shows that today's innovation support system needs to be able to offer forms of financing, but also support to different kinds of innovators. Everybody doesn't look the same, everybody doesn't want to do the same thing, and we need to look at entrepreneurship in a broader perspective, as Sarah said. But if you focus on financing, since we've done that as well, but if you're a business supporter or incubator, for example, there's different kind of ways to do this and take action and do the work yourself. So let's just focus on actions. If you work with any type of financing with entrepreneurs, we work with regions, we work with incubator science parks, but make sure to collect data to understand and to know what you're doing, like measure and monitor and follow up your work. That's number one thing, to understand where you stand today and to take action. Second of all, review how diverse your team is and how and who makes the funding decisions within the teams. Expand that, challenge or expand your team. Bring in new perspective, add a advisory group to it, get help from other perspective if you like a homogeneous group of people. Review and analyze your existing investment networks and forms of funding. We see initiative all over to pop up that doesn't fit the historical and traditional way of fund. Like maybe we need to do things in new ways, since our future needs different kinds of way doing things. So we see new forms of financing, structured VCs or forms of funding. For example, unconventional ventures, syndicate, Invest, real estate network, other kinds of investment networks that you connect to. that attract these kinds of entrepreneurs that we misses. Review and analyze how your funding and support is distributed. Number 5, analyze if you fund certain types of entrepreneurs, business ideas, or innovators. Can you see a normative way of doing things? Can you challenge yourself? And yeah, look at your structures and systematic work. Learn about how unconscious bias can affect your decisions and how it limits equality and inclusion. Reflect on if there's a difference women and men in the meeting, in pitches, for example, or how we can see in field studies, for example, Mark Conley from KTH's field study about promotion and prevention question, that women, we ask to ask women more preventional question and men promotional questions. How can we do that? We can see in our networks and the incubators we work with, they start to train their entrepreneurs to meet this kind of unconscious bias and biases with the entrepreneurs, to be aware of these kind of things when pitching, for example. But it's also up to the investors and the financing way of doing things. Knowledge yourself and see if you treat or you have unconscious bias in your approach. Number 7, you can change slide. Make sure that several and different staff members have contact with investors and are involved in decision making. For example, if you're an incubator or a business supporter, and you have 2 types of people or 1 person who is in charge for all the investor network, that can be a problem. So expand that workforce and make the decision depend on different kinds of people. For example, we can see that sometimes it's just 1 person, often a elderly man holding the networks, and like, can we just work with that kind of way instead of let that decision be on 1 person's shoulder. Number 8, develop the flexibility to adapt your support to different needs and goals of individual entrepreneurs. Everybody doesn't want to do the same thing in business. It's not a woman issue, or it's like we can see different kind of entrepreneurial models, impact businesses, B Corps, whatever. Like, it's a lot of things that doesn't need high-speed growth. It's like it's not one way or the highway. We need to see that there's different kind of building businesses, and to adopt forms and methods to meet them needs. For example, you can work with methods such as number 9, the ear-making funds, and specify gender equality and inclusion as requirements to receive fundings to make a change. If you have 1% of funding that goes to women, like, earmark money to make a change, or try different ways of doing things. And 11, educate yourself, like, and use your gain knowledge and understanding to develop and adapt to different ways of doing business. Constantly educate and learn. What we see is that attitudes and culture is a problem in this field, and we need to work with ourselves. So it's not about just attracting women to our organization. We also need to work with ourselves and our organizations. And then for that, you can educate yourself, learn, and be humble about our history, and that we actually live in a discriminating world, and be aware of that in the ways we work. So yeah, that was 11 fast actions. If you want some methods, we will put some links to the reports or the studies that I mentioned. And also, if you want method guidelines, we have an open source webpage where you can download our material and get inspired, or just reach out. That was all from me, I think.
Yeah.
Sarah, do you want to say something?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melina and Sara, for that hands-on advice on how to take action. And we will send some links in the chat where you can find more information about the Yes Way. An actor who has their focus on community building and inviting investors investing in female-founded startup is the startup house Mink. So please, Ida, tell us more about this.
Thank you very much. For those of you who don't know Mink, it's, as Moa said, the startup house of Malmö. We have several different programs from really, really early stage up to a little less early stage, but still early stage. You can move on to the next slide. So we have a goal of 2024 that we're going to have 50-50 female, male-founded companies in our programs. And of course, we also want the same when it comes to funding. One of our biggest things that we do every year, which is a yearly event, is our Nordic Female Investors Meetup. This year, it was done as a hybrid event. We had 100 participants live at different hubs. We had in Malmö, in Lund, Helsingborg, and Luleå. So people were actually sitting together watching the event, and we had a few here at Mink as well. And online, we had about 150 to 200 steadily during the day. And it's a way to invite more women into the investment world. And we've seen an increase in female-founded companies and women joining the investment world, even though during these 5 years it's been running, we haven't actually seen like that big of an increase in investments made in women. But we also believe that that is coming. And we also now this year started a LinkedIn community for Nordic Female Investors Meetup, and I encourage all of you to join. Of course, we have about 350 members today because we want to keep this running all through the year. So it's not just something that happens once a year, but it's actually ongoing and where we can encourage and invite more women into joining the investment world, because we also believe that we need female investors, because female investors tend to better understand, I would say in general, the female entrepreneurs. And it's in general also easier for women to connect to women in that sense. We have also recently set up a tech lab and tech coaches, because many of the companies that are high potential, high growth, they need to have some type of tech. And in general as well, there are less women with experience within tech. So our tech lab and tech coaches is one way to also bridge that gap by making it more possible for women with an idea, but maybe not with the technical knowledge, to get that insights and get that help that they need to maybe build their first prototype. And through this, we are also going to next year run an innovation competition where you will actually, the prize will be that you get to build your prototype together with our tech coaches and tech lab. We also believe that we as an organization need to show diversity. And one thing that has been shown to be very successful is for our accelerator, Fast Track Malmö, which has one female and one male as co-leading. And it's been like that before. We recently switched the persons, but we still have one man and one woman, because we believe that the women applying to the program are more likely to approach the woman who is the co-lead compared to the man, and that might open up for more women to actually want to apply as well. So that's been really, really successful, and we can see, I can't say that we have had 50-50 all year, but we have, compared to our incubator program and in startup labs, we have a better percentage-wise for male and female-led companies joining the accelerator. And that's what we want to continue. So, for example, for us, that also means that the next time we're hiring a business coach, we have one female business coach today who's also the head of the incubator, and we have a few male ones. But we also know that that's what we need. Next time, we would actually need a female. And you can take next. And want to also give you some examples from Fast Track Capital. Fast Track Capital is our angel-led co-investment company with private and government capital, and that's where I work, or what I work with on a daily basis. And when Fast Track Capital 2 was started in the end of 2018, we had a goal of having 25% women among the angels. And we actually reached 30%. I personally should not take any credit for that because that was before I started, but I'm really proud that it is that way, because many of these women who are in the Fast Track Capital company, they are new to investing in the startup scene, but they do actually have the funds to make it possible, but they maybe not have had the network as before. And as you can see from our portfolio companies in Fast Track Capital 2, we have approximately 25% of the companies are female founded, 35% mixed founders, and 40% male founded. And those numbers are both in terms of number of companies and in terms of actual money invested. We still have things to work on, as you can see, because it's not perfectly equal, but we are getting there. And getting back to that, one of the big reasons for this, because Fast Track Capital invests in all the accelerator companies and parts of the incubator companies, which is also why having the co-leads in the accelerator is really important and has also made a huge difference in how we are investing. You can take the next one. And also some other examples that are not connected to Mink or Fast Track Capital, but for me personally, because I do some other things as well, except work for Mink. And I'm involved in a network called Feminvest, which is a pretty big network for women in entrepreneurship and investments. It started out as a way to educate and get more women to invest in the stock market, but has developed from that to something much broader, because we noticed that there's also a need for more network when it comes to women in entrepreneurship. So Feminvest today, we educate women about investing in general to lower that barrier. And we do a lot of coaching and helping female founded companies to raise money, and have so far helped 6 companies raise money. And I think one of them was more or less only used the Feminvest network to raise their round. And on a personal note, I think it also goes even further back to like probably when we're younger than before we start this company, but talk about money. I think it's important that females talk about money together and with their male friends. It tend to be easier to talk about money with male friends and talk about investing. And I also believe we all need to be better at encouraging each other's dreams and allow failure, because as the speakers before were talking about, there is a risk of failure when you enter these high growth companies, and it needs to be allowed for women as well, not only for men. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ida. We got a question in the chat about where to find more information about Feminvest.
You can just go into feminvest.se, or you can also just send me an email, because Moa, I think you will send out our information afterwards, and I can give you some more information. We're on Facebook and Instagram as well. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So no entrepreneurs without investors, and no investors without entrepreneurs. But how to change the inequality within the system? Welcome Hampus to take the screen and share some thoughts on the.
Thanks. So next from this, because we don't need the intro slide, but I think that what I really want to make sure we talk about is equality as a bigger thing. Could you please go next slide? Sorry. So I think that the thing I find very important is we need to think about why we want diversity. And I think that there's definitely just a pure conversation about justice, which I think is a very good one. But I think there's so many entrepreneurs that I meet that don't really realize that it's also about diversity within the team, and the investors should look at their portfolio as like how they make it more diversified, and limited partners, the ones that invest in venture funds, should think about how we get more diversity, because diversity is a vantage point. It's a lens you look upon the world. It's an aperture. And I think that if I want to be a bit dystopic or poetic, depending on your worldview, I would say the way that got us here is not really working out. And I think that the best way to figure out how to change the ways is sometimes to change who runs the future. And I think that, to quote a lot of people, is the future is slightly too important to let it be run by 25 to 45-year-old men. So I think that one of the reasons I think that diversity is important is to make sure that we understand that we cannot really continue the way we're doing things. So it's super important that we realize that. And I think it's important for people to understand that, independently if you care about a better future for people or if you care about a better financial future, that no kind of stock trader or anything would put all their money in dollars or euros or yen or just in Sweden or anything. People really think about how to make a broad portfolio, and there it's very, very strange that most of the money goes to one select group. Next slide, please. And also, I think within a company, it's really important to realize that when you have different vantage points, you do differently. So I think everybody who brought up, for example, that you need people who are running accelerator or venture funds to be of multiple kinds of people. I think that's super important, because you're just going to pick different companies. You're going to solve things differently. You're going to get different kind of advice. And I think I really want to mention this and stress this, because I think that so many people I know are saying how important diversity is for diversity's sake. And I think that speaks mostly to the people who are minority groups, because they feel, finally, we're talking about us. But I really want to make sure that the people who are not the minority, who are the majority, who are sadly in power, that they understand that, like, investing in diverse companies is not a way to be nice. It is actually a better way to make money or change the future. As Sigrid said, female founders are building companies differently. So I think it is definitely a different way of doing things. Different, not worse, different, not good, but difference and diversity is always good, because you have different outcomes and a more structured portfolio. Next, please. And before going into solutions, I just think it's very, very important to stress, for me at least, that for me, it's not just about gender. And I think that Sigrid really mentioned that the Nordics are very, very far along on thinking about gender equality and in structural gender equality, about maternity, paternity leave, for example. But the thing is, we're actually really, really unequal on thinking about work opportunities, and we're even more so in the financial system. And I think that if we go even further, we're absurdly unequal when we go outside the gender topic. In the Nordics, it's almost impossible to kind of even send out a survey which asks questions which are not just about gender. If you want to ask about sexuality, about ethnicity, about educational background, that is semi-taboo in the Nordics. Whereas if you go, for example, to the UK, it's a completely regular question you fill out every time you do something. People will ask you about your ethnicity or your sexuality. And it's something in the Nordics we just don't want to talk about. So I find that it's super important that when we think about diversity, we're not only thinking about gender as an aperture and lens. We should really think about multiple kinds of diversity and intersectionality, because if you're kind of hit by two minority tags, that makes your life even harder to do things. And I really want to stress also that for the people who are not a minority, that if you've ever run your 10-kilometer race against the wind, or if you've ever kind of tried to do anything without eating in the morning, or if you've ever played the game on expert level, that is the life of people who are in a minority in a system. It is not that they're worse at it. It's just that it's way, way harder. And I think it's so absurd that some people are playing the startup game or incubator game or venture game at the easy setting. And some people are just, when they start life, somebody just set their level to expert. And they just have to play the whole game on expert level. And nobody even looks at it and realizes that there are different settings. Next slide, please. Going into what we do, so we're a venture fund, seed stage venture fund. We invest in pre-seed and seed companies, which is very, very early in the system, but not obviously as early as Idessa that Mink do, which is like extreme there with company foundation. But what we do internally is we do an annual diversity training. For us, it's super important just to remind ourselves that we are biased. we will judge people differently. And of course, it's something that we don't want to do, but it's something that we have to acknowledge that we do, and we have to just train ourselves to have that conversation and ask. And for us, it's super important that this is, again, not only about gender, but really realizing you do it about anything from disability to gender to ethnicity. And you just judge people differently. And it's something that I think that second you say, I am gender blind or I'm color blind, that is you saying, like, you don't acknowledge that you do have a bias. The second thing is for us to have a recruitment policy, to really think about who we recruit and why, and especially, as many mentioned, about the positions that actually are part of doing the actual investments. So for the people who kind of judge companies or bring in companies, we think it's super important that those people really sort of, they're coming from as a diverse group as possible. For us as a team, we're 3 people, and we have been super frustrated when we looked at other companies and other investment funds. I mean, that how it seems that people can raise money without actually having diversity as a topic today. And I think it's something that if you're an institution today, either you're a big family office or you're a pension fund, I think that 2020, I would pretty much put as a requirement to make sure that the teams that you're investing in, the venture funds you're investing in, they are either diverse from the start, or at least they really handle diversity more than lip service. Third, one of the things we do when we invest in a company, we really want to make sure that we help the companies on helping change their aperture. Because when you meet a company, which is, for example, all male founders, for us it's a negative signal, but it's not that we're not going to invest in a company just because of it. But we want to make sure that if we do invest in a company that has absolutely no diversity, which, to be very frank, is pretty painful for us, then we really want to make sure that we help them with training and policies. And it's really about widening their aperture, really making sure that they understand, by being an all-male 10-person team from the same university, from the same postcode, means that they cannot recruit anybody else in the future, because nobody wants to be the first different person in a 20-person team. So it actually limits their recruitment funnel massively. And by that, of course, it limits their ways of looking at solutions or problems, which I started talking about. Next thing, what we do is we have open inboxes and office hours. We're actually just starting office hours. We haven't published them yet. But what that means is that we really want to make sure that we're building a system where you have to know the right person to get in, because that is a world of privilege. If you happen to have gone to the right education, or if you happen to know the right person, or have done the right background, you can always get in contact with a venture fund. But what do you do if you don't come from that background, or you have a name which people would look at and say, I don't think this is a startup? And for us, it's super important. Just publish our email addresses on our webpage, on a LinkedIn, and you can always email us. And the second thing we're doing there is publishing open office hours for minorities. So they're going to be available. People can try to book them if they're not, but we're going to ask an assessment question, which is like, which minority do you consider yourself to be? The third thing we do towards the portfolio companies, we ask them for KPI, key performance indexes. We ask them how many male and female, how sexuality, ethnicity, and socioeconomical privilege. We ask them all these questions for their founders. We ask them all for their board. And one of the things we see so importantly is just by asking this question, we already send a signal that this is something that they need to work on. Of course, over time, we'll need to work more and more on it, but it's something that we feel that if we measured ourselves and we measure it towards the portfolio, we think that if you don't measure it, it's very, very hard to change it, as also Sigrid said. And I think that then finally what I see we set our goal doing as a whole, which is not a tactical thing, but it's a very long-term thing, is we think that venture with the world we're in is really frustrating because it's a very, very privileged world. You have to be for a certain background, a certain person to even start a venture fund, which means that people who actually have the checkbooks, they're coming from a very limited set. We just see it among the 3 of us, and Heidi and Joel and myself, that when we are fundraising, big institutions, they don't doubt my background for a second. They actually don't doubt Joel's background for a second, but all their questions and critique is about Heidi, which is absurd. It's really absurd. And sometimes I get really, really angry on these calls, and I really try to like bite my tongue because it's their bias. But I find it so frustrating that this is a pipeline problem. If you don't have female entrepreneurs who have built big companies, growth companies, it's very hard to get them in the investment role of the venture funds. So I think that we need to solve this problem both by getting more people with more diverse lenses, being them female or not female, just making sure that they have better values at the limited partners who do invest in venture funds, and to make sure that venture funds by themselves look at this more. They were able to general partners, the people who invest, from a more equal and bigger aperture. And then, of course, for the startups, making sure that startups understand that if you're a male co-founder, probably the best person you can find will be a female co-founder or another background which matches yours. So just trying to make sure that we see this as a pipeline that we have to develop all points. This is not just something we have to think about, how do we get more money into female founders 2021. This is a long journey, and we want to make sure we solve all different parts of it. Because for us is the solution that got us here 2020 obviously isn't working. We have a couple of problems. We need to make sure that the whole system has a wider aperture and solves problems in a different way. Thanks.
Thank you, Hampus, for that presentation. Now it's time for some questions for our speakers to answer and discuss together. And something that we've been talking about today is bias. And connected to that discussion is AI. In Sweden and the rest of the world, a lot is invested in AI. So what role do you think that AI and emerging technology will play in making the funding system more equal and inclusive? Ida, what is your take on this? What is trending in the startup scene?
Oh, I think this can have a huge impact if we allow it to have. Of course, we will also, it won't be like the only thing that we're going to use AI, but I think that it can really, really help us and like at least acknowledge the biases that we have, because a lot of them, it's like Hampus was also talking about, is like we don't even know about them. And in that sense, like data and AI can really, really help us and questions the decisions we make and could probably help us build a better pipeline to start with. So I think it can have a big impact, totally.
Sigrid, is this something that Menon has done any analysis on?
Unfortunately not, but it's a very interesting topic and something that would be relevant to investigate further and see it more. We'll both look at the statistic or how it looks, but also kind of investigate on what we can do further.
Interesting. So another question. Earlier this week, Germany came with the news that corporate boards must be equal in accordance with their 40-60 principle. Do you think that such a bill or a rule is something that the Nordic countries and the funding system could take after? Melina and Sara, what is your take on this?
I can start. I'm up for it since we're a really underrepresented group, and I'm totally in. I think we need a faster help to move forward, and by requirement and the law, that could be one thing, one step. Yes.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. Yeah, it's a step.
And one of the goals in Agenda 2030, Goal 17, is about partnership to achieve the other goals. I'm interested in to hear about what partnership you would like to see in the Nordic innovation ecosystem to achieve a more equal and socially sustainable funding system. Hampus, do you have any thought about this?
That's a really good question. I generally feel that I'm also a bit worried about partnerships. I generally think that some kinds of partnership are really good, because I think that you can both shame organizations in doing better, because you can show that it can be done better, and by working together, we kind of expose these things better. But one thing I really worry about is getting a consensus culture where you kind of, I think that I see that a lot in, for example, the angel ecosystem, that you have a lot of organizations started, which every single angel, there's a group of angels, and all the angels get to kind of vote if they want to invest. And instead of themselves investing, or instead as Fast Track Capital is doing, where Fast Track Capital is deciding, and then the people, independently of who they are, has their money invested. Because I'm a bit worried anytime you start a partnership where people end up not doing anything because they don't want to look stupid. So I'm just a bit worried where I actually really like when you have organizations like the Yes Way or Feminvest, which is just proving that this is a smarter way of doing things. And then suddenly it's very hard for people not to do the same. And I think we're going to see it in the venture scene, where we're seeing a lot of venture funds are asking each other how they're handling, for example, open inboxes, or getting women as general partners is another topic that a lot of people are asking about. Like, how did you find like a person with the right experience and blah, blah, blah. So I think that I'm a bit worried about formalized partnerships, because I think sometimes they kind of tend to kind of just make everything so slow. And I really want to instead promote the actors that are running fast and make sure people understand them. Like, I think, for example, this webinar is great. People now know about so many new and interesting initiatives and can be inspired.
Awesome. Do we have any questions from our listeners? Just raise your digital hand or write in the chat, and we can we have time for some, or at least a few questions. Otherwise, Ida, what do you think about the partnership and the community building that's happening around these matters within the startup scene?
Well, I think there is happening a lot, but I think, Hampus, you had a really good, interesting point that I haven't really been thinking about before. So that was, thank you for like opening up that. And yes, because sometimes things are moving too slow when you get too many voices or people involved. I mean, but of course it's important to have partnerships and to work together. But it might also be that we need to do it a little bit different depending on where we're coming from. So maybe not everybody can do it exactly the same. And that's why being inspired can be an easier way to get there and to be moving faster.
Great.
On that comment, actually, for example, I do think that actually if you take the word community instead of partnerships, I think communities are really powerful. I think getting, like, for example, looking just at what Mink is doing with the Nordic Female Investor Meetup, is just getting people to understand that being a female investor is not an oxymoron. Like, because there's so many people who just think that, I don't know, and I'm really wondering how much is nature versus nurture. I really genuinely don't believe that. I think that women are slightly less risk takers, maybe slightly risk takers genetically, but I do think it's something that it's just nurture. It's just like we did give different feedback. I mean, as we just talked about, it's just like, is it risk that we're talking about, or is it opportunity? And I think that we just handle people differently from when they're young. I mean, I have 3 kids. They're not all the same gender, I can very easily tell you. And it's frustrating as fuck. Sorry for saying this on a public thing. To hear like teachers and educators in the system giving different feedback. And 2 of my kids are twins. They're the same age. So like they are doing the same thing. We see exactly the feedback they're getting from the teachers. And one of them asked by if they risk and like trying different things. And one is saying, why didn't you get the full score on this test? And I just get so goddamn irritated that the whole system is viewed that way.
Interesting. We have a question from Maria, please. Maria Svantemark.
Sorry, I was on mute. So really great event. Thank you. It's very interesting and good with different perspectives. So I'm a female founder myself, and we have just started raising our first round. And I do experience what you say, that I tend to get different questions based on my gender. My co-founder is also from Iran, so he's colored, and I also noticed it with him. And when I'm in those meetings, super frustrated, seriously, time I'm not interested anymore. But I also realized that is not a very constructive way of handling it. But I haven't found a good way of getting those questions. Do you have any advice or any way of handling that you would be able to share?
Great question. Maybe Melina and Sara could start answering.
Yeah, I just want to put up an example what they do in Sundsvall West Northern Incubator Businessmaker. They trained, actually it's a problem, so to meet the problem fast, like to understand it, you can understand these kind of questions by training your pitch, for example, or be preventing those questions. So they actually train their founders. For me, it's like personally, it's like you don't need to put on a suit to be able to get understanding, but it's like what to do when you know that you're going to be asked different kind of questions. Then maybe you can prepare your pitch to be more promotional in your answers and be aware of that, for example. But also, I mean, yeah, I have a lot of examples from business developers around in Sweden that actually needs to go together with their co-founder, with the women who is founder, on this kind of meeting, because otherwise they're not going to be listened to when having this kind of business meetings and meetups. So I think it's super frustrating, but one way is to meet the problem by understanding the biases and how you are going to be treated. But for me, it's not enough like to bring a white man meeting. Like that's not the way I'm saying we're going to do this, but maybe understand the studies and prepare the answers, and also that is one small tips. Is anybody else want to comment on that?
I have a comment. I generally feel that we really have to make sure that people understand that the shortage of supply in the system are great entrepreneurs. So if you have a great idea, there definitely is an investor out there for you. And I think that I really wish that people learn from 2020 COVID, the world is completely flat. You can get an investor from Australia to California, and like you should not talk, like I go bananas when I talk to idiot investors. Like I just like if I talk to an investor and they don't get me, I stop talking to them. I just politely stop talking to them and I find another person to talk to. I don't think you should bang your head and trying to get a person that doesn't get it. You should just find another investor. I think that the thing is, if you might find somebody who's not your investor, but who gets it and can introduce other investors. So I would really say, please just email me. I'm super happy to introduce you to a bunch of people who gets it. And they might not be your investor, but they get it, and they might be able to introduce you to other people. So just reach out to more people. So please feel free to email me, and I'll promise I'll respond within 10 hours.
Awesome, great. Thank you, Maria, for that question. It is time to wrap up this webinar. So thank you all speakers for your sincere answers and hands-on recommendation for us all. Now I will hand over to Annie to present some coming activities.
Yes, thank you so much, Moa, and thank you so much to the speakers of today. I really have so many new thoughts and ideas, and I think it's so inspiring to hear all these different kinds of presentations. And I hope that you who are listening also have some new tools and thoughts on how to move forward. And the conversation continues. One example is that we really encourage you to follow Nordic Innovation Task Force for Diversity and the upcoming webinars, because we will continue having webinars like this. This time it was Sweden and Vinnova, but next time it may be Norway, Denmark, or Iceland or Finland. So please keep an update on that. We will add the link in the chat. But also, we want to say that later today we have a webinar at Go to 10. It's Moa who's going to talk about how AI can be used to promote gender equality. And I also want to mention that we are going to have a hackathon, AI for gender equality, also later next week, where we'll also be very much focusing on action and how to actually create commercialized solutions with AI for gender equality and equality in large. And we will also, Vinnova, be participating at the Female Founders event at the Digital later in December, so you can also come and talk to us then. And if you have any further questions about this webinar or anything else, or Vinnova's work, you can contact me, Annie, or Moa. And if you have any more questions about the Nordic Task Force for Diversity, you can please contact us, but also our colleagues Marte and Trine at Nordic Innovation. So with that said, once again, thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our speakers of today. Really looking forward for having the conversation going and be more action focused. So I wish you a great continuance of the day. And please check out the chat box for all the links that we said, and we will email also the recording and the contact information. Thank you.